October 22nd, 2017. I'm not sure how to start this video off. I guess I'll just go ahead and read a short little excerpt of a paper here. It says, uranium, thorium, and lead schematics in 3 Apollo 14 basalts and the problem of initial lead in lunar rocks. It says here, the isotopic composition of lead and the elemental concentration of uranium, thorium, and lead were measured in total rock samples in the samples 14053, 14073, and 14310, and on mineral separates of 14310 and 14053. Here's the front of that. I printed this out. Of course, it's behind a paywall, though. I don't want to pay money, but the clues here are right in the abstract. It says here, similar analysis of 14053, which is about a basalt sample about this big, give high discordant rock model ages of 5.6 billion years ago, 5.18, and 5.48. And I had to find this from the internet absent one of the creationist sites. I had pulled this diagram from. If you'll look at that, this is on page 39 in the paper number 62 on VIXRA. It has here the Apollo sample numbers and the radiometric ages, dating ages for those samples. And what threw me off, because I was actually quite shocked, is that this was actually happening, that I was finding very big clues to how much stuff has been covered up by NASA and other researchers, is that sample number 14053 had a uranium, thorium, lead dating age of between 5.4 billion years ago, which was confirmed by confirmed by a third party of this diagram being correct, and 28.1 billion years. That's pretty fucking crazy. To think the moon had a radiometric dating sample of it to the tune of 28.1 billion years ago. And I was like, shit. It really is true. The moon is some ancient dead star. And I was like, well, this is just too much. I have to verify it with other things. And then I started looking at this graph even more, and I noticed that the potassium-argon method even has the moon older than 7 billion for 3 different samples, and it has one for over 6 billion. Look, you can see it yourself. Right there. And then on the left-hand side, the other thorium, uranium, and lead methods have the moon between 4.6 and 16.2 billion. So 16.2 billion, that's there too. And then 14.1 billion. And there's 11.2 billion here. There's 8.2 billion. This isn't a coincidence. All these are over different samples. But unfortunately, what's happened is it's sort of buried it. I mean, these studies were done in 1972. What was that? 30 years at 2002, 40 years at 2012. So 45 years ago. Nobody's going to talk about it anymore. It's settled science. But being that I'm a communication guy and I like to look at linguistics to find clues about, how people talk about things, I just kept on reading on the original uranium thorium paper right here. I kept on reading, and it says, these data show that total rock model ages do not in general yield crystallization ages. So essentially what they're saying is they don't know when these rocks crystallized, thus making them to where they're solid, and then the stuff radiometrically decays. Because if it was liquid, it would be all over the map. But they don't know when it crystallized, so they don't know the initial conditions for the crystallization. As well, they outright admit that they think that the lead that threw off their samples was added to the lunar surface after the fact. So instead of taking the lead seriously as being a byproduct of the uranium thorium decaying and then building up a lot of lead in the sample, they say, well, it was added in later, so we don't really know how it was added there, but they don't provide any mechanism for how that lead was added later on, because obviously it doesn't fit. Why would you accept a radiometric dating sample of a rock being older than the universe itself by twice the amount when you can easily just say, well, it was added in later, but we don't really know how, you know? And then the real clue as to that, you know, they admit that they probably found out that the moon is much older than the Earth, is that they say here, such data from initial lead may provide a new chronometer for early lunar evolution. So they admit, they're like, yep, we found out that the initial lead tells us, or assuming that all the lead that's stable we found was the initial lead, then what we have here is that the moon is vastly older than what scientists have been saying, you know, being that they think that it came from the Earth, or the solar system all formed everything all at the same time. But of course, the people who understand the theory I'm working on, this fits, because I have dead moons and Venuses between 25 billion and 65 billion years old. Check it out. They've lost all of their atmosphere. See, Earth's would be like 10 billion. And then if you keep on going down and all the oceans evaporate and everything just goes dead, that's what you end up with, is a dead moon. And they're many, many, many billions of years old. I mean, look at that thing. That's a dead star, man. It's not the same age as the Earth, no way. Or even close. But the thing is like, you have these scientists that take their models for how radioisotopes should decay, and they say, well, this is the rate at which it decays, and then they force fit their rate, their understanding to fit what it is that they already believe to be true, and then they bury or disregard all the disconfirming evidence and disconfirming ideas. And of course, it's kind of sad, because here we are in 2017. This data came out, and 45 years ago, that's when scientists should have been like, shit, we don't understand how the moon formed, and this thing is like way older than the Earth. But they never did that because of the overreaching paradigm and the fact that, well, NASA is a conformist culture. You know, they don't want anybody to stick out. And back in the 70s and 60s, it was extremely conformist. It was straight up like the Marine Corps almost, you know? It wasn't a place for freewheeling individuals who could figure things out. Especially when NASA's budget was, you know, a lot higher. So, well, proportionally to our government, you know, spending back in the day, NASA was a lot higher than it is now. So obviously people don't want to upset that gravy train, you know. Why would you want to risk getting paid all that cash from the government just because you want to tell the truth to people, you know? Of course, I'm not a conspiracy theorist in that regard. I'm like, oh, we didn't land on the moon. Obviously, I know we landed on the moon. We got the fucking rocks from there. So those people that think I'm some conspiracy theorist on that regard, you guys are idiots. But I'm sure people, they talk like that online without doing any research. But basically here, this was written, I can't remember where I found this little graph, but I'll have to find it sooner or later. But I found the Apollo samples on there, and that they confirm what all the other papers I've been finding online. And to let people know that when you're working on something like this, this was like me working in 2012, 2013. This is 4 to 5 years ago. It's taking me this long in 2017 just to come back to this after working on so many other things. It's just unreal. I didn't realize that this would take this much time to get the theory out there. Of course, just want to throw that out there. But yeah, I'll link all this information on the bottom of the page so you guys can read it for yourself and see what you think is true, what's untrue, and basically just look at all these articles with a very skeptical viewpoint. Don't just accept what they tell you at face value because they're authoritative institutions. Keep in mind that a lot of the authority over time sort of disintegrates, and as long as you can realize that it disintegrates because of updated information, then you can have a more complete, well-rounded view of how science progresses and how our understanding of nature progresses. And it's very complex. It's very, very, very complex as I'm learning here. It's fucking mind-numbing. Alright, y'all, take it easy.